The CIA's Media Network, the Geopolitics of Opinion. The Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA as it is commonly known, is a bureau of the U.S. government tasked with the gathering and management of foreign intelligence. Common functions of the CIA involve counterterrorism, espionage, foreign influence, early warning actions, and counterintelligence. As the agency grew, it also expanded into technical support, research and development, and cyber warfare operations. The Office of Strategic Services, the predecessor of the CIA, was started in the World War II era. Previously, the U.S. government left the business of collecting and disseminating intelligence to American foreign policy experts and elements of the armed services. The need for a centralized department was made clear by the intelligence failure that culminated in the surprise attack on U.S. naval assets in Pearl Harbor. A few months later, on June 13, 1942, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, had formed. The OSS was headed by William J. Donovan, who led the effort to create a single-source intelligence agency in the U.S. Under Donovan's lead, American spies were trained to study papers, cables, reports, photographs, maps, journals, foreign newspapers, and other materials from hostile countries, laying the foundations for modern intelligence gathering. At its peak in 1944, the OSS had 13,000 personnel and was one of the most vital contributors to the Allied war effort. With the surrender of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, the OSS was restructured into Central Intelligence Group, CIG, an interim agency created by President Truman. The National Security Act of 1947 later converted the CIG into the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. In the post-war years, the agency became involved in the mass communications field as U.S. officials became increasingly concerned that publications in war-torn Europe would spread communist sympathies among the public. Ventures into the broadcasting industry led to the creation of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. The U.S. government site for global media lists Radio Free Europe as a private, non-profit, multimedia broadcasting corporation that serves as a surrogate media source in 27 languages and in 23 countries, but this obscures the true intentions of the corporation. Aimed at Eastern Europe and Soviet-aligned states, Radio Europe, alongside Radio Liberty, led American efforts to foment dissent and instability in socialist countries overseas, contributing to the samizdat, the underground distribution of censored literature in the Eastern Bloc. The success of the two organizations spawned two spin-offs, Radio Free Asia and Radio Free Cuba. Radio Free Cuba was a media venture with political and military objectives. Operating studios in Florida and other U.S. states, Radio Free Cuba, now known as TV Marti after the Cuban writer, broadcasts anti-Castro messaging at Havana with the objective of instituting regime change. Radio Free Cuba assets were also kept as a supplement to Radio Swan, which was intended to be the main communications network for the Bay of Pigs operation, one CIA official reported. Radio Free Asia was primarily aimed at the Chinese mainland, as well as other enemy regimes such as Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and North Korea. Hopes were that the venture would become the start of an Eastern operation rivaling Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty in scale. Two common complaints about these broadcasts were the viability of messages to get through and the effectiveness of the messages in reaching the civilian population. Taking Cuba as an example, a report to Congress summarizes the situation perfectly. TV Marti television broadcasts to Cuba, which began on March 27th and have continued generally between 03:45 to 06:45 local time, have demonstrated that a clear and an excellent quality TV Marti signal reaches Havana, Cuba, from its broadcast site at Cujo Key, Florida. Foreign and domestic stations are not being subjected to any adjacent and co-channel interference from TV Marti. The government of Cuba has consistently and effectively jammed the TV Marti signal since broadcast began. There is widespread interest among Cubans in seeing TV Marti, notwithstanding its early morning broadcast hours and GOC jamming. Although there is no effective way to overcome Cuban jamming, there are areas where jamming does not interfere with the TV Marti signal. Because of the difficulty in obtaining reliable information about the reception of TV Marti, the actual size of the audience is unknown. The Cubans have effectively prevented reception of the Radio Marti medium wave AM signal by counter-broadcasting on that frequency. In this particular case, ground teams were dispatched to Havana that determined TV Marti signals were coming through, an area which could reach up to 50 to 70,000 individuals of the Cuban populace. Tourists, emigres, and political refugees were surveyed about the broadcast as well, with 81% of those in the target area having attempted to tune in to TV Marti. Book publishers and newspapers were also operated, funded, and connected to the CIA, with the organization trying to balance anonymity with influence. One tactic was to employ CIA agents as staff members of media groups. The South Pacific Mail, based out of Santiago, Chile, is said to have employed 2 such operatives, and rumors also say similar relationships occurred at the Guyana Chronicle, the Haiti Sun, the Japan Times, the Caracas Daily Journal, and the Bangkok Post. The current CIA is organized under 5 broad disciplines known as directorates, which are the Directorate of Analysis, the Directorate of Operations, the Directorate of Science and Technology, the Directorate of Digital Innovation, and the Directorate of Support. These directorates come together under central mission centers, allowing the CIA to perform operations that cover a variety of fields with high efficiency and secrecy, but the organization has gained particular notoriety for its roles in regime change, torture, the support of terrorist groups, and even drug trafficking. Political operations are often undertaken indirectly under the cover of certain NGOs. Collaboration with NGOs started with the Great Lakes Crisis in the 1990s, a migration crisis that occurred in Central Africa, and expanded during the instability that happened in the Balkans following the breakup of Yugoslavia, according to a CIA report. A more recent example is that of the U.S. foreign influence over Venezuela's 2024 elections. Shortly before the vote, New Jersey-based company Edison Research issued a report predicting Maduro would win only 31% of the vote, resulting in a landslide victory for opposition candidate Edmundo Gonzalez. The report was based on exit polls the company had conducted across the country. Edison Research has been the sole provider of election data to large media groups such as ABC News, CBS News, CNN, and NBC News since 2004. After the report's publication, it was referenced numerous times by Venezuela's opposition, such as the opposition's leader Leopoldo López, billionaire Elon Musk, The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and Reuters. References before the election were used to draw in voters and international observers into the narrative that the Maduro regime would fall and the democratic victory was assured. In the aftermath, Edison's report and others like it were used as evidence of election fraud and that the elections and Maduro alongside them were actually illegitimate. In reality, Venezuela's National Electoral Council, CNE, ultimately reported that Maduro won the election with 51.2% of the vote, whereas Gonzalez received 44.2%. And the 8 other opposition candidates got 4.6% combined, a far cry from what U.S. observers expected. Such a blatant difference between Edison Research's prediction and the actual reality of the vote calls into question the legitimacy of the organization. A deeper dive into Edison's clients include a list of high-profile names, Fortune 500 companies, Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Liberty, the BBC, and the media companies listed previously. Besides Venezuela, Edison also does election research in the Republic of Georgia, a border country to Russia and an area in which the U.S. government has a key interest. Georgia has made moves to prevent the spread of foreign influence in its government, introducing a law that requires NGOs and media outlets operating in the country to disclose their funding. Organizations with more than 20% of their funding coming from outside Georgia must register as bodies pursuing the interests of a foreign power, and failing to comply can lead to fines of $10,000 and additional fines every month that they continue to ignore the disclosure. In the wake of the Parliament passing the bill, which is named the Law on Transparency of Foreign Influence, hundreds of NGOs, activists, and journalists assembled in the country's capital, Tbilisi. Many carried American, European Union, and Ukrainian flags. Such a huge mobilization shows the power of U.S. propaganda outlets. Enormous budgets allow Washington to support large networks of foreign operatives to write articles, influence public opinion, and organize activists to show up on the streets. While America has a large military-industrial complex, its most important export is not guns nor oil. It is actually the cultural capital that comes from the New York Times journalists, Hollywood directors, government think tanks, and Silicon Valley CEOs. Until other countries can develop parallel organizations, American hegemony cannot be effectively challenged, as the young and impressionable in such societies will always resist counter-American messaging.